Welcome to AI in Design, where we explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping the world of design. I'm Nick Martellero.
And I'm Dan Saffer, and we're faculty at Carnegie Mellon's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. Each week, we break down the latest AI developments, dive deep into topics that matter to designers, and talk with fascinating guests who are right at the intersection of these fields.
Whether you're a designer working with AI or an AI practitioner interested in design, we're glad you're here. This week, we're catching up on some news, starting with an article that says your next user isn't human.
Is it an alien? Then we'll talk about two articles that are about how AI is reshaping teams and changing those team dynamics. One asks us to consider rethinking the shape of design teams, while the other says that our bug-free AI development cycle is actually hurting collaboration.
Then we'll talk about a piece on the conversation problem that says treating AI like chat messaging has been costing serious users of these tools real time and real recall failure for about 2 years.
And finally, we'll end with discussing how the future of interacting with AI might not be about prompting, but about setting constraints. So if your next user isn't a human, what exactly is it?
We've talked about this before on episode 4, actually. And it's sort of this idea of machine experience, that your next user is likely going to be an AI agent system. Think Claude or OpenAI having access via MCP, as we've talked about many times on this show, access to your software so that the agent can call it, can do things, get information, take actions on behalf of the user.
So this article is from Elena Verna, who is a product manager. The very traditional product management cycle was defining your customer, building for them, product market fit, grow, ship it. This is how it works. And she's saying like, hey, I think that assumption is breaking down a little bit because of what you just said, that agents are interacting with products on people's behalf using MCP. And so the real user might never actually engage with your product at all. They are on the other side of an agent.
Yeah, one of the things I like about this is this idea of growth shifting from getting users into the product, like human users, and actually making the product discoverable and usable for agents. And we're seeing this in different ways. The first way, which is, I think, pretty leading edge, is through things like OpenClaw systems, where OpenClaw agents are actually able to look up in, say, MCP directories, what exists out there, what products and what MCP servers can I connect to then do certain tasks. And so they can define what task they, as in this AI agent, defines a task it needs to do on the user's behalf. The user hasn't specified what system to use per se. It goes out, searches, finds the right thing. Maybe it confirms with the user, hey, is it okay if I use this tool, if I use this piece of software, and then makes a direct connection with that without the user actually interacting. The other place where I'm seeing this is user-driven, where people are trying to find products that have good AI agent integration. I know that I am finding myself doing this way more. So I want every piece of software now that I use, even that I've been a long-time user of, that I use manually, I want it to be able to talk to an agent. Actually, Dan, I know you and we have to use a piece of software called Canvas for our class management. And Dan's laughing here because it's not...
God, why would you bring such a terrible thing up, Nick?
Well, because it actually has a pretty decent API. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, if it has an API, I can write a wrapper and I can actually get an agent to do a bunch of stuff with it. And then I interact with my agent that then takes all these actions. So, and people have done this. Actually, there are MCPs for Canvas. So Dan, we have the problem every semester. We basically have to manually update our course. Even if it's the same course, same assignments, we have to change every due date. We've got to make some slight adjustments to the schedule. We, in theory, should be able to just get an AI agent now to do that. And it's cool. Fortunately, Canvas does actually have an API. So they're actually pretty well set up for being able to do this. But there's a lot of software now that doesn't have this. And I'll say I personally, this is my perspective, like more and more, I'm like, if I don't have a connection into your software, I'm starting to think about looking for alternatives. And so in this article, right, there's this idea that like, maybe thinking about products where the agent-driven workflow is a first-class experience, that's something that you should be aware of as a designer, and you should be thinking about making sure that this works for people. And then of course, then you have to figure out what that experience is, that sort of human driven, uh, outsourcing of whatever you want to do with your product to an AI agent.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine what this is actually like from being able to design for this. It's basically saying working probably with your PM and your engineer being like, okay, this is the core things that we can do. We put these in the MCP and this is kind of how you use them. Okay, go ahead. Is that what you imagine it's going to be like?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it looks like. I mean, I think that there's an element one of, yeah, looking at what you have access to in regards to, say, if you have an API, if you don't have an API, figuring out what you can expose, and then figuring out what it is that you can get an agent to do successfully. So actually, probably a lot of this design process in the future is going to be really iterative, working with your development team to expose certain features so that they're accessible by an agent system, and then having a bunch of people even internally just trying to use all those and just figure out what is going to make an agent be able to do this reliably. Because that is one of the challenges, unlike an pure API system where it's super verifiable and testable, like agents can pick and choose and do weird things because they are more probabilistic. I mean, the goal with MCP is to not to make it less probabilistic, tell the agent, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. Yeah. And then from there, then a question is, I think this is where a lot of new features can actually be driven from. So a good example of this would be my students were developing a prototype of a whiteboarding tool, and I realized while I was sitting down, I was like, I don't want to write sticky notes anymore. I don't want to manually drag and drop and write sticky notes anymore. I just don't want to do that because I feel like it's such a simple thing for me to be like, I'm just going to list this stuff and have it do it. And actually, I want to be able to like talk to my system. I use a tool called Whisper Flow where I literally will it lets me move into any text box. This is not a promotion of anything. It's just a piece of software I like using. And it basically just does transcription, and then I can hit enter, but it's just really good, high quality transcription. And then the agent needs to figure out from what I say, generate all these sticky notes, move this stuff here. But yeah, my whole like worldview is actually starting to shift of like how I want to interact with software. Is this sort of really mediated kind of interaction?
It'll be strange because places will become infrastructure. Like, will you ever actually go to Canvas and interact with it ever again? I mean, maybe for some certain special things or for some like really deep tasks, but even for that, you might just be like, well, have my agent go interact with Canvas and enter the grades, grade, check to make sure that everything is submitted, and for the things that were submitted, give them the completed grade done. But would Canvas care about that? Would Canvas mind? Now, Canvas is B2B software, so maybe less, but I don't imagine that there are other places like Amazon would be thrilled with that, or other big name brands are not going to be happy, especially when they've spent a lot of time developing and making their user interface and user experience completely smooth so that you can get more people to buy more stuff while they're there. Like, hey, we're going to be showing you ads while you're here about things that you could be buying and more stuff you could be doing and upselling and all that kind of stuff. All that goes away in the agent world where an agent is doing this stuff. I mean, this is great for some consumers, but
Well, I was going to say, Dan, here, it might be that we just haven't figured out how to design those types of experience into an agent driven workflow. So there's no reason that an agent couldn't also say, hey, I noticed that you're buying these things. Do
mm,
you need something else? Hey, knowing I like actually have access to your shopping list or your old, some of your notes, and I can pull that in. I mean, in theory, right? An agentic system could be, if people give it data and permissions, could even have more that it could do, or it could just do it differently. And I guess this speaks to
fair enough, fair enough. Yeah, you could
the
definitely
task that
see like
designers have. Yeah.
a thing that you really like is actually on sale right now, and I saw it. Should I just add it to the cart while I'm here? I mean, you could definitely imagine that.
Right. And this is something to remember that when you're developing an MCP, this is something that you as a company can control. I mean, there are a lot of open source MCPs out there, but arguably you can also control that, and thus you can control the experience via the MCP. And so I think right now we just don't have all of the design patterns figured out. It's still really new, this whole experience. And I think this is one of the reasons why it comes up on the show. Like, this is why we're talking about it again, because, it's not a particularly complicated idea. Like, oh, agents are going to be a user of your systems, but it's more so that actually, no, it's the mediated interaction with the person on the other hand who wants to do something with your product or service. They're just going to use an agent to do it. You got to now figure out, okay, well, what is that mediated experience back to them? And then from a financial perspective, then what are the things that you do there that help drive, revenue generation and great user experience?
Right. Who do you think is going to be making these MCPs in the future? Is it going to be a combo of designers, PMs, engineers? In the in the past, like APIs, like it was pretty rare that designers had any kind of input into that. That was always kind of in the developer world. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with MCPs versus APIs.
Yeah, I think that where you're headed with this is that it is probably going to be more of a mix. And I think that there are going to be more designers and PMs involved in this because actually, if anything, they can help define what it is that people are going to want to do. They're the ones who are talking to users. They're learning from people to understand, well, okay, I wish that I could tell Claude to do this. I'd love, for example, on my end, right, I have all the Apple stock software, reminders, calendar, mail, notes and stuff. And I'm like, man, I need all of these things to talk to Claude. And actually there are MCP servers out this, and that's actually a way that I'm interacting with them more and more is that way rather than, and then I have them as a view. Like the interesting thing here is like there's still I want them as the view, but my interaction layer is still now being mediated. But yeah, I think it is going to be designers, PMs, and developers all working together. And maybe this brings us into thinking about some of the stuff we're going to talk about in this episode. Are those roles shifting? And actually, it's all these, triple designers who do everything now.
Right, right. Well, that's a good segue to our next topic, which is the shifting design roles, specifically an article by Darren Yeo called Rethinking the Shape of Design Teams in an AI World. And this article talks about the role and fate of junior designers. And right now, I think that there's a lot of discussion about hiring junior designers and a lot of people in the industry are like, well, I don't want a junior designer. I want senior designers. And this is affecting you and I as people who train people who become junior designers. So I'm glad to start seeing articles about this, about what the cost is about not hiring junior designers and the fact that once you do that, the people that would become senior designers starts to thin out real fast. We actually saw this 20 years ago when nobody was hiring anybody. And so for a long time, you did have this weird gap of no senior designers for a very long time. And I think now we could be faced with that same thing again. We've talked about this here before that, all these functional roles are getting blurred. Engineer, PM, designer, we're all doing the same job now. And having that kind of mix where you can have some really good junior designers that are coming up and doing that natively. They're used to that. That's how they're working.
And so one of the
Yeah.
things that Darren lays out in this article is sort of three different restructuring of design teams. One of them is sort of maybe more standard, sort of this idea of a pyramid, which is a traditional, you've got a bunch of juniors at the base. And then that as you kind of rise up in an organization, you have fewer and fewer. And those are your senior design teams, your senior leadership. Oftentimes they're kind of doing a lot of high level, direction work, whereas a lot of those junior developers and designers are doing sort of that lower level production. Then there's this idea of the tomato basket. So it's a basket of tomatoes, which is actually, I'll say when I read this, I was like, I'm not sure I totally get this metaphor, but the idea is that it's a squad of of designers working together, and sort of they're more organic, self-contained, and oftentimes it's a designer, a PM, and a couple of engineers working together. And of course, that could sort of change depending on the needs. You probably still have only one, maybe PM in a squad, but maybe the number of designers and the number of engineers might change, especially given the newer tools. And this is suggested to kind of allow you to move faster. Each squad can kind of work on their own project and sort of move the company forward. And I do think that that is how a lot of organizations who have like say flatter hierarchies are maybe working today.
I was gonna say, definitely a lot of startups are already working that way, right? Where there just there just isn't a hierarchy because there's just not enough people for there to be one.
Yeah, and then the last model is sort of this atom model, and they're talking about this where there's this sort of nucleus of high energy, like highly defined, like this is our goal, and then people are kind of doing things together around that in sort of a maybe a very non-hierarchical way. But then around it, there are these electrons or elite individual computers who, or these electrons or elite individual contributors who are zipping around, as said, that they're working on certain things. Maybe they're jumping into certain stuff and then they're moving on to something else. Maybe they're even doing some of their own things. And it's this interesting sort of mix where people are kind of doing everything all at once, right? They're acting as PMs, designers, developers, and that this is what kind of allows people to kind of work with very, very little hierarchy and sort of just take their talent and like let it go and see what's going to stick and go on. I do think one of the important parts of this is this idea, though, that there is like a pretty serious goal, that the nucleus is like, we know what we are trying to do, and then everyone then has the ability to do that. So those are the three models that are proposed. I mean, I think they're kind of interesting. I think you're right, Dan. I think a lot of startups are probably more in that heirloom. And I think really AI driven startups or like startups that are using a lot of AI now are probably moving more towards that Atom model.
I think what will be interesting is to see if any of the bigger companies start to adapt these kinds of different organizational structures as we see AI starting to flatten the hierarchy to make it different kinds of structures. But when you have lots of people moving around doing their own thing and with not a lot of central communication, that's tough to scale. And that's why we have the pyramid, and that's why we have hierarchical structures in large companies. It's just because it's difficult to figure out what everyone's doing and align everyone together. We talked about this a couple weeks ago with the institutional AI versus the individual AI. It's easy for people to be working on stuff all by themselves now, but if they're not aligned, what they're working on could be useless or a distraction. Or which leads us to our next article, which is all about how AI efficiency is subtly disrupting the interactions that build strong teams. And this is from Hudetz, Casey Hudetz and Eric Olive. And the idea here is that there's a lot of people saying like, oh, I don't have to bug someone to do this anymore. Now I can just do it myself. And this is why this article is called The Bug-Free Workplace, where you don't have to bug anyone to get stuff done. You can just go do it yourself. And product designers don't have to bug researchers to get research reports, and product managers don't have to bug engineers to get bug fixes, and designers don't have to bug for rounded corners on a button or whatever it is, that we no longer have to bug our colleagues about doing little things for us. And this is supposed to be extremely liberating. And by God, I know that when I was an IC and I had like little design changes and had to bug an engineer to fix them, that was always just like, it should just be easy to do this. And now we have the tools to do it. And that seems amazing to me. But what they're saying is that if we get rid of all these kind of, dare I say it, micro interactions with our fellow teammates, that we're automating away all the things like quick questions or small talk or the connections that really help to form and sustain healthy teams. So again, if everyone is working in their little silo and there's no shared culture, there's no shared goal, there's no shared vision, then that is a detriment to company culture. and overall, eventually the product.
I think part of this, though, depends on the size and the working culture that a company or a group has. I was reading an article on how it feels like small teams that are using AI to move quickly and are giving agency in this sort of either tomato or atom kind of metaphor way, but they're in the same space, like yelling at each other when they're going to do something. Actually, I think you avoid some of these things. Like maybe you're not bugging someone, but you're just saying, like the article actually gave this description of like, hey, I'm going to update something on the user interface, like, I'm doing this now. Also, I'm going downstairs to go get some, croissants. Like, do you want some? And then they like walk downstairs to go get something while their AI agent is doing something, and they come and bring it back up to the food back up to their teammates. But this was a really small team. I mean, we're talking just a few people, and I think that this idea maybe breaks down when you have large organizations because it's really easy to silo people. And if you think about what's happened with remote work, I mean, this is something that I have found working remotely with people. And if I don't check in with them enough, if I don't have those interactions, just to remind myself that they are like a real person with all kinds of things going
Right.
on in their life, that like, oh no, I'm sorry, you're just an agent. Like you are a robot. You're an input output machine for work. And the funny thing is now we literally have input output machines for work in these AI agents. And I actually worry a little bit that too, like the more we're doing that, the less, like if you don't have this sort of bugging or connection or something where you're really working with people, like you're going to forget that, and everything just feels like an agentic input output system for your work, and it feels very not human, even if it is potentially humans or humans with AI on the other side.
Right. And they talk about research where they say that, disconnected employees, they leave if they don't feel like they're connected to their fellow employees and to the company and stuff like that. They take off or they just disengage. They are just a body in a seat. It hollows out the workplace. We've all worked with people that are, completely checked out, and it brings everything down. I think what this article uh, really highlights is that companies right now, until we are at the many small one person AI startups where one person does everything, and we're probably already in that era. It just hasn't fully bloomed yet, but until that happens, companies are made of people, and having those interpersonal relationships is part of having a company and part of why you have a company, so that collectively you can do more than just yourself alone, because you have different strengths and different ideas, different opinions. You can have diversity of thought and diversity of perspective. And that kind of stuff actually is very good for product development, because someone can see something differently. Someone can catch a bug that you wouldn't. Someone can catch a bias that you wouldn't. Someone could think of a better way to do it. There's all different reasons why you have a diversity of people that work on products.
Sure. I'm looking at the diagram that's in this article and thinking about the atom model, and you can have stable and unstable atoms. And thus, it suggests to me that there probably needs to be a decent amount of work on the human interaction, company interaction, relationship, knowledge sharing side to basically maintain that sort of stable. Like you can have a super buzzy, exciting work culture where people are moving quickly and creating stuff, but you have to have these links to kind of keep the thing in a stable formation. And this is making me think, like, I'm almost wondering, are there, I guess it would probably be product managers who also do a lot of team cohesion type stuff and team interaction, but also I don't know if they're like HR managers out there who are like, how are you thinking about your company's interpersonal engagements when you're also asking everyone to use AI? Like, I wonder if there's any listeners out there who are thinking about this. It'd be cool to hear from you. How are you trying to maintain sort of a cohesive and productive, for all the reasons that Dan has talked about, and, what makes product teams great and to lead to great products? How are you doing that with everyone also interacting with all these AI systems?
Yeah. The next article is from Adi Levine, and it's called "The Forgotten Conversation Problem in AI Chat." And the thought here, and this is one that a lot of my students last semester really looked at and took to heart in our UI for AI class was about the limitations of having a messaging app architecture that is actually for knowledge work, and that it is hard to remember, recall, search, browse, find older items that you might want to work on and revisit and think about again. The same kind of interface we can add an emoji to Slack is now the thing that you're trying to write code with and reason through real problems with. And going back and trying to find some of these really important nuggets or, reuse some of these important nuggets is a real knowledge work problem that is created by a user interface problem.
It's a problem that I hear a lot of people having. Oh, hey, I have a zillion chats now, and the thing doesn't remember. Now, there are, at least if you're using like ChatGPT, they are trying to develop sort of a memory for that where it can remember your past things. So you can ask it, hey, didn't we talk about this? But I do think that people who've been using these systems for a while have been missing those features. And a lot of systems, especially if people are designing chat interfaces into their products and they're not thinking about the memory, then those products aren't going to have it.
Right. Because it's expensive to keep and index and maintain and go back. I mean, that's why a lot of these places they have memory, but it is for paid customers only.
And another thing about this is that people are also, it's unclear like what the best system is, because one of the challenges with memory is that if you say have a memory file that gets bigger and bigger, as that gets bigger and bigger, that potentially gets added onto your context. And all of a sudden, what you thought was like, well, this is not so many tokens. All of a sudden you're blowing all these tokens, especially if it's not loaded in a certain way. And so I think we're kind of early in those days. We just haven't figured it out yet. But arguably, searching memory is a cost, and it's a cost in tokens. And
I know that when I ask Gemini questions, it immediately goes and like looks through like all my personal notes and sometimes tries to connect something completely irrelevant. Like Gemini now knows that I have a dog, and I'll be like, "Hey, where's a good bar that serves great martinis?" And it'll give me a whole list of those, and then it will find like dog friendly bars. And in some cases, that's like, "Oh, that's so nice that you think about that." But in other cases, I'm like, I don't need that unless I specifically ask for it. Like, you are just burning tokens for no good reason there. It's like when someone says your name too often in a conversation. You're like, "Okay, I get it. You know my name. Back off a little bit."
yeah, I think that the ability to pick the right time to access memory and the right piece of things to pull up is hard. And that basic argument, that's a super intelligent thing. Like if you asked your friend, hey, do you have some recommendations for bars? But like they remember maybe last week you were having a thing where you're saying, oh, I've got a new dog and I'm really enjoying taking my dog out and it's so nice and I need to kind of get the dog to be good with people. Like they might bring that up as here's some options, but also, hey, do you plan to bring your dog? And that's the other thing, is they're kind of checking in with you when they do that, which is also another mark of intelligence. I think from that point of view, it's a design problem that we just haven't fully solved yet. Like how
Mhm.
to bring up and how to access memory and stuff like that. Right now, we're probably just trying our best. I imagine people are trying all kinds of things to utilize
Right.
memory. But I think as we
Right.
move
And
forward, we
certainly
might figure it out.
that was what my students were doing last semester too, was trying to think of what are some new metaphors for this. Like they came up with a threads and knots metaphor to try to be like, this feels more like chat than file retrieval for just as an example. One thing I really did like about this article was that it really does take the long view and going all the way back to Vannevar Bush and the Memex from the like 1940s all the way up through today, looking at how every generation solved the retrieval problem. And really love when something can actually take a historical view and be like, well, actually, we have solved a bunch of these problems. We just need to actually remember that we've solved them and reinvent them for modern technology.
Yeah, or we need to connect them with the things, at least some of the stuff that exists. One of the things that they talk about in this article is sort of Rome research. They bring up Obsidian. These are,
Right.
of course, software that's out there that helps people to take notes, keep their memory. It's sort of a second brain, and they have all kinds of hyperlinking systems. Arguably, you could just say, well, all right, what's the agent experience? What's the machine experience for that, and how do we add that on? I think that we still don't know how to do that. And I wonder, maybe it's the designers of these tools who have thought really hard about this stuff, that maybe some of the best designers to help us figure out how to use memory and how to save and link and then recall. So, I mean, I'm excited by that. Or it could be users. I mean, one of the interesting things is that in the Obsidian, for those who don't know what it is, there's a lot of user-driven innovation within the Obsidian ecosystem. There's a lot of users who create ways of working with it and plugins and things like that. Actually, I think Notion is kind of similar. Like Notion is like a base platform, and then people do all kinds of amazing things with it, and like they share their templates. Like I actually think that Notion templates in some ways are like this awesome way of sharing how you think and how you organize information and take notes and build systems for yourself, and then people can kind of transfer that. And so could also be, there may be some really great user led innovation in this space too.
And our last article today is a controversial one from Eves Binda called The End of Prompting: Why the Future of AI Experience Design is Constraint First. And the big idea behind this piece is that prompting creates this illusion of control with AI systems, and that future AI UX is not about prompting, but is more about creating constraints where what a system can say and presumably do is governed by what it can verify.
Already we're starting to see a move away from prompt engineering and prompting systems, and instead we're asking systems to complete a task under a certain set of constraints. Arguably, within the AI assisted software development work that's been happening, I mean, a lot of people have found that, developing a product requirements document, which often has the requirements and the constraints, it sort of sets out what should something do, is working quite well. Actually giving those things to an agent actually seems to help it produce better software, because it's in the same way that if you give that to a human development team, they also produce. But that's not telling the team, do this, do this, do this, do this, which is more of a prompt. It's more of a, please create software that can achieve these goals, but must meet these constraints. And we're starting to see that more in sort of the co-work model. So Anthropic's Claude co-work, actually, there's all these guides that say, hey, you need to think about prompting, or at least talking to cowork differently than you do the chat model. The chat model is more like a conversational, and you can say, hey, do this thing. You kind of act like you're directing it. Whereas the cowork model, you say, I want you to do this task, and here are my constraints, here are my expectations, here's how to, and then how to verify. Here's how I'm gonna check it so that you do it. And then, because it goes off and does an agentic loop and says, did I actually achieve the goal of the user that they've set out based on the constraints they've given?
This ties back to our skills discussion last week with MCD, and it seems like a lot of skills are also about setting constraints. Don't do this, don't do that, don't use the color purple, those kinds of things. Don't use too many M dashes. I know I have that in my writing skills, like, hey, you are limited to 2 M dashes per piece. It's just setting up guardrails that the system has to work around. Now, what I think is interesting is, at least in my experience, how often the system can just ignore those and is blowing through those and being like, whoopsie, I forgot that, or sorry, I did everything but not in the way you told me. And I'm like, well, that's not great. So I think if we do start to have much more of this idea about constraint architecture, I think we have to have systems that actually are more rigid in obeying the constraint architecture.
Yeah, and I think we also have to have systems that help us author those constraints and
Yes.
view and prioritize. Right now we have a chat stream, and again, to back to you know Adi's article on the forgotten conversation problem, but also this idea that like a chat stream is not really where we define, a certain set of constraints. And, we can talk about them, but actually when we define them, we typically need something else to document them and to view them. This is where, for example, having a different mode for working with agents can be helpful. So I use, for example, plan mode when I use a coding agent. And in plan mode, one, it just doesn't do anything just yet. It just helps you think through like what is the plan. But what it's doing, it's actually creating a markdown file called plan, which is documenting, here's what the plan is, here are the constraints, here are the requirements. And of course, that's human editable, just like skills are. And I don't even know if that is the best way to do it. I mean, it's the easiest thing to do now, which is create markdown files with a little bit of structure. But I actually could imagine even better systems for managing constraints requirement and actually having better interfaces that are still interacted through with an agent system, but that have a better view and that also potentially can be better accessed by an AI agent. Because one could even argue that the markdown file isn't even the best way. I mean, it is just a text stream. There may be better ways of actually saying, hey, you really need to focus on this stuff. This stuff's a little looser. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know that there are actually within engineering design, there's a lot of like constraint management systems that exist. I think IBM creates this stuff. I will say the software is not what I would consider the most usable. And this maybe brings up an opportunity to kind of revisit some of those ideas. But to make them work, one, for an agentic way, and then two, to make them work for more people or for people who may not be like full on engineers thinking always in constraint systems, but actually for folks who aren't as aware of that.
Right. I'm trying to think like, are there ways that you could even start to preemptively? Is that the word I'm looking for? Preemptively, I think that's the word I'm looking for. Suggest constraints to users. Hey, I'm going to work on this for no more than 10 minutes. How's that? Or I won't spend more than $3 in tokens performing this action. Like, I wonder if there are ways that it could start to say as part of your plan, hey, here's some of the constraints around it. Or just as even as a confirmation. Like, hey, I'm only going to use verified sources from reputable content sources to make this report for you. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could imagine that it could do those kinds of showing possible constraints. And so they don't have to go into a .constraints file or something like that to tinker with that, because as we know, how many people are actually going to be doing that? Probably not many. But we do still have to expose things like skills and constraints and all these other things to people that would love to be able to use them and love to be able to have them, but they don't know about them. I'm sure that my parents don't know about them. I'm sure that most people don't know about them. I think there's growing divide, I feel, between the people that know like all the capabilities of these AI systems and the people that are just using them in a very casual way. And I don't know, that feels like a miss. Like, sure, there's always going to be like power users and regular users, but getting some of the people who can do basic stuff and getting them to be like, hey, you could be doing so much more, I think it is a missed opportunity here. And particularly when it comes to things like agents right now, which are particularly, I think, challenging for most people to set up and run and use. I know it is personally for me. And I feel like I'm a little bit in the know, or at least you and I have this podcast and I talk to you once a week about this stuff.
I do think you bring up a great point, and this is something maybe for designers out there who are developing agent-based systems, who are building in new features and really advanced capabilities. How do you help educate the users? How do you help them learn how to work with these systems? And especially when it's weird. Like one of the challenges I think that Anthropic might be dealing a little bit with now is that it is different to work with Claude Chat versus Cowork, and
Yeah.
that actually getting people to shift over to Cowork to really do stuff that Anthropic has recognized, like people want to be able to do these like work style, like pretty long running tasks. And so they built a whole system around it, but now you have to teach people to think differently when working with this. I think that how do you do that? And right now, I mean, I think some of the best things that they're doing are mostly articles and maybe a little bit of video. I think there's some awesome like influencer educators out there who are producing content where they're showing examples. That I will say that's where I learn a lot of my workflows, like new ways of working with these things is actually from YouTubers, who are producing content and saying, hey, here's how to way to do this. And here's how you have to change your thinking. But how do you kind of build that in a system? And then also to your point, how do you build the agents themselves such that they can help the user learn that? Because that is actually one of the interesting things. It's like, help me help you. Like if I hire someone who has expertise to do something, like they're not just like, oh, I tell you things in however I tell you and you figure it out. Like they're actually doing the job of managing up to me and saying, here's how you can work with me best so that I can achieve the goals that you've outlined.
Right. I mean, think of ye old travel agents. You'd go in and you didn't have to know like all this stuff about the location that you were doing, or you're just like, hey, I just want a trip to Italy. Can you arrange that for me? And they're like, well, okay, well, let me ask you a couple questions. Do you want to see museums? They don't have to know all the underlying systems that will make that happen, but they have to know what is possible to happen in order to have a good experience.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of that, right, with like the pop-up, multi-choice. Hey, let me ask you some question. Let me ask you a question. You give me an answer, and I like that. Sometimes I will say I've found it to be somewhat aggressive now in like predicting what I want, and then I'm like, no, no, that's not what I want. Or hey, I just want to keep having a conversation. Please, like this is not. Stop trying to reduce this down to basically AD. But that is one way they're doing it. I wonder what else there is. I wonder what other design patterns there are for this. I imagine, yeah, we can learn a lot from how people do this with each other. Like the travel agent example is a good one. But I do wonder if there are other ways, like other interfaces and other ways to kind of facilitate this.
Right. Sounds like a great research question and a great unexplored design problem. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of AI and Design. We will be back next week with more news, more AI, more design coming right at you. We'll see you then.